Hello. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today, but I wanted to make a video as my contribution to the conversation about AI and climate change. I want to start in a somewhat unexpected place. Here we are in the bathroom in the building and the toilet behind me. And I want to tell you a little bit of a story about toilets because this is a technology that we completely take for granted. It's a very everyday technology. We all have one. We probably never think about it. There are, however, three very fundamental flaws with the toilet as we know it. One is that it gets rid of waste and it treats human waste as something to be rid of. And then we therefore lose the nutrients that are part of that. And in a circular economy, ideally, we'd be reusing those things a little bit better than we are. Previous times and places have recognized human waste as a resource, and we don't. Minor point. And much bigger issue is the fact that in that system there is drinking grade water, which means we have this enormous great infrastructure purifying water, which we then use to, to flush away waste. It's a massive waste of time and energy. And the third thing, of course, is the vast amount of infrastructure behind a toilet. I will now leave this cubicle in case anyone else needs it. If you think of how much infrastructure there is behind a toilet, there is the water purification system, of course. There is the sewer, and there are the pipes leading out under the building and into the street and away to the waste processing plant. Vast, vast infrastructure that we have behind our water and sanitation systems in developed countries. And it's because of that vast infrastructure that there are so many people in the world who don't have clean water and sanitation. 2.8 billion people who don't have access to a toilet like this one. And you can imagine if you're in, say, a large city in Africa, and even if the money is there to build that kind of infrastructure, think of the disruption involved of retrofitting sewers underneath everyone's homes. It's just an absolutely vast task. So, a few years ago, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation hatched a plan to reinvent the toilet for the 21st century so that these 2.8 billion people, almost half the world's population, might have access to a toilet in the future. And so they launched this competition and they invited people to reinvent the toilet. And it ran for a couple of rounds over a couple of years, and then they finally picked a winner. And the winner was the California Institute of Technology. And they won with this really quite ingenious design where the toilet looked like a perfectly normal toilet, to the user, but the waste dropped into a solar-powered electrochemical reactor, which processed the waste. It created hydrogen, and the hydrogen was then stored in a hydrogen fuel cell. Really, really clever. And utterly useless to the 2.8 billion people who needed it most. Because if you live in a slum in Kibera alongside a million of your neighbors, you don't have access to a hydrogen fuel cell. You can't have an electrochemical reactor underneath your house to process that. The expense of that device was ridiculous, and the size that it took up. So they were completely dazzled by the technology and made something that was actually completely worthless to the people who needed it most. And this is a really key point. When Bill Gates announced that winner and when his committee chose it, they had confused what was clever with what was useful. And this is a recurring theme in technology. I remember 20 years ago when people first started applying the internet to devices rather than just to computers. I remember reading an article about smart fridges and how in the future people were going to have these smart fridges that would notify you when you were about to run out of milk. I don't have that kind of a fridge today, 20 years later. That was a prediction for the future that never materialized because, as it happens, if I need to know if I need more milk, I open the fridge door and I look and I can see it. It's such a simple thing. There is absolutely no reason why you would need a smart fridge to do that. It was confusing what is clever with what is useful. You might remember a few years ago we had a similar situation with blockchain. Every startup, no matter what industry or sector they were in, they were raising money by telling everyone that it was on the blockchain, and the blockchain was a vital part of their business plan. There's all sorts of great ideas that did happen with the blockchain, and there were all sorts of just complete jokers who were too excited about the technology. They didn't know what was useful, and they had lost sight of what was clever, lost sight of what was useful in pursuit of what was clever. This is a really key point for us as we discuss AI and climate change. AI is very exciting. There's all sorts of really useful, very ingenious applications. We must be really alert to the fact, from the history of technology behind us, that we don't repeat that same error and get so dazzled by what is clever that we lose sight of what is useful. A second thing to remember, which I think also is really evident in the story of Bill Gates reinventing the toilet, is that all technology serves somebody. Bill Gates set out to serve the 2.8 billion people without a toilet, but he did not reach those people. The only people who were served by his winning entry in the competition were the California Institute of Technology, who got to prove how clever they are, and the Bill Gates Institute, who got to announce their competition entry. And they got some attention from it. It never reached the people it was supposed to reach. The whole thing was the parameters of the competition were set by people in the West who had no experience of living without a toilet. And so the people who most needed it were invisible in the process, and the competition failed to reach them. In a capitalist economy, all technology will end up ultimately serving the richest and most powerful people in the room, unless it is specifically designed otherwise. And this, again, we can see from history. We can see it already repeating itself in the climate change world when we look at things like electric cars. Electric cars are going to be a really critical technology in stopping climate change and in reducing emissions from transport. But if you look at who has an electric car right now in Britain, how many times have you heard, oh, I'd love to have an electric car, but I can't afford it? And that's not people just making excuses. If you look at the number of electric cars on the market, there are a choice of 111 different models of electric car priced £30,000 and above, with 45 different models in the kind of 50 to 70,000 pound bracket. Now, those are expensive cars for a lot of people. The market, left to its own devices, has served the richest first. It is going to be rich people who can afford electric cars first. If you look at the budget end of the market, there are only 7 cars that cost under £30,000. The market has served the richest. And that's a real shame, because before it can really make a difference, electric cars have to be mass market. They have to be for everybody before we really start to make a dent in traffic emissions. This is a really critical point for AI. Left to its own devices, AI is going to be designed by rich people in the West and by the most powerful people in the world, and it will inevitably serve those people. It will take deliberate effort to bring in the perspectives and the voices of people elsewhere to make sure that it doesn't end up entrenching existing political and economic inequalities. It needs to be designed to be inclusive, because the default is that it will not be. How do we get those people in the room? It would only have taken one person who lives in an unplanned community in Africa or in India or somewhere like that to have been in the room with Bill Gates and his committee choosing the winner and gone, no, that's not going to fly. And it could be different. Okay, the third thing. Fundamentally, Bill Gates made it too complicated. Simplify it. Simplify it. One of my favorite examples of climate change solutions, I think one of the most ambitious projects, is the Green Wall project in Africa, the Great African Green Wall in the Sahel region, where you have people who are trying to stop the Sahara from advancing across their land. And they know that climate change is going to accelerate the processes of desertification. And so they want to plant a band of trees across pretty much the whole of Africa in order to hold back the desert. And it's working in some regions. And the most critical technology for that is a ditch. They dig these kind of crescent moon-shaped holes in the ground that provide just enough of a bank of earth to stop the desert winds and protect small plants. And the crescent-shaped ditch collects rainwater and holds it just enough to let grass get its roots down and start growing in this very compacted soil. And when there's grass, you can get shrubs. And when you can get shrubs, you can get trees. And over the course of a decade, you can transform a landscape from a completely hard pan desert surface to something that is green and lush and that has the potential for agriculture. There is no more simple technology than a ditch and the person who digs it with their spade. It takes one person 1 day to dig one of those ditches. So you have communities of people that are doing this together and they are transforming the landscape. This is a really key point. AI is not going to solve climate change on its own. Ideas on their own don't solve anything. You need a spade and you need a community of people ready to wield it. For AI to genuinely make a difference in climate change, it has to be able to process all the data, and this is all kind of stuff you're going to discuss, um, and come up with solutions that we haven't thought of, perhaps. But it will always need boots on the ground. It will always need active citizens applying those things. There's a quote from Ivan Illich who says that progress moves at the speed of a bicycle. No matter how clever the technology, someone needs to go and apply it. No matter how clever the vaccine, somebody needs to walk village to village through the mountains and give it to people. And AI will be no different. Right. To wrap up a little bit, I'm aware that I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm very optimistic about AI as a tool and the role that it could play in climate change. I figured that you guys would hear a lot about that kind of stuff later on today. So I am kind of playing devil's advocate by talking about toilets and about really simple technologies and spades and things. Um, but let me just summarize with those key points. In order for AI to be useful, and I really hope it is, it needs to be applied inclusively with the right people in the room. If it doesn't, it will end up serving the richest and the most powerful. And at the end of the day, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit more later on, let's not confuse what's clever with what's useful. Thank you.